The U.S. says it's reconsidering its aid to the Palestinians after a unity deal between Hamas and Fatah. Israel is also taking retaliatory steps. So what impact could this deal have on peace negotiations, and can the reconciliation last? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. The rival Palestinian groups Fatah and Hamas have signed a deal that could see them form a unified government for the first time in years. But it's not their first such agreement. Deals in 2011 and 2012 fell apart before they were implemented. The US and Israel have both reacted negatively to the announcement. Israel immediately cancelled a session of talks with Palestinian negotiators, and the White House says it makes a delicate peace process between Palestine and Israel even more difficult. Rosalind Jordan has more reaction from Washington.
This is not the victory handshake the U.S. wanted to see. Officials say they'd heard the rumors Fatah and Hamas were trying to reconcile, but they admit they were surprised the rumors came true.
This could seriously complicate our efforts, not just our efforts, but the efforts between the parties, more importantly, to extend the negotiations.
Israeli and Palestinian negotiators had been trying to extend peace talks beyond April 29th. Those talks were already in trouble because of accusations from both sides that they weren't dealing in good faith. But the deal between Fatah and Hamas, which does not recognize Israel's right to exist, could give the Netanyahu government the cover it needs to walk away.
I'm not sure there will be an international push on peace as long as Hamas is in the Palestinian government. We want peace. We want to overcome the issues that separate us. But Hamas says no to that whole process.
And analysts say that would point out a key mistake the U.S. made, not pushing Israel hard enough to make tough choices.
We have not confronted the Israelis. And as long as the United States is going to be a supporter of Israel first and of the process second, it's not going to succeed.
It would be difficult for the U.S. to embrace a government including Hamas, which Washington says is a terrorist group. By law, Washington is not supposed to deal with a government that doesn't recognize Israel, doesn't renounce violence, or doesn't honor previous deals between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And if Hamas does become a part of a coalition government, the U.S. would be required to stop giving the Palestinians hundreds of millions of dollars every year in financial aid. That's something that would be devastating to an already fragile economy. So what happens now? The Obama administration says it's not giving up on the peace talks, but it's had enough trouble keeping the Palestinians and the Israelis talking. Now, some here in Washington are concerned that this new deal could prove to be a game changer and not the kind that leads to a victory party. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, the State Department.
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took to the internet to vent his frustration in a series of tweets. He called Hamas a murderous terrorist organization that calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. And he said Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas needs to choose between peace with Israel and an agreement with Hamas. And he tweeted, "Whoever chooses Hamas does not want peace." Well, a lot to talk about, and let's get some analysis from our guests. P.J. Crowley is a former U.S. State Department spokesman and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. He joins us from Washington, D.C. From Ramallah, Hanan Ashrawi is an executive committee member of the PLO and a Palestinian negotiator. And from Jerusalem, Gil Hoffman is a chief correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Hanan Ashrawi in Ramallah. What has been the general Palestinian reaction to the news of this deal?
Well, on the whole, we look at this in a very encouraging way. The Palestinians felt that finally attempts at reconciliation are beginning to bear fruit. This rift between the PLO members and Hamas has been debilitating. It has been extremely destructive. And the public certainly was pushing for real reconciliation. But at the same time, the mood is not euphoric because people know that the real test is in the implementation. It's in the steps that are to be taken afterwards in order to translate this agreement into a reality on the ground. And they understand the difficulties ahead and they understand the pressures. But at the same time, there's no way that we can proceed while we continue in this division and while we are weakened by such divisions that have been used in order to undermine the Palestinians as a whole. Israel says you don't represent all Palestinians. Gaza is not part of it. The Americans voted against statehood because they said we do not have sovereignty or control over Gaza and so on. Now that we are trying to repair our political system and trying to reactivate, revitalize our democratic, pluralistic, inclusive system, somehow people are crying foul. No, I think this is something that the Palestinians have been looking forward to and have been pushing for years now.
Well, let's go to Gil Hoffman. We've heard the reaction of the Netanyahu government. What's the general Israeli public reaction to the news of this deal?
Well, that depends where people are on the political map. The Israeli left that wants to push the peace process forward is absolutely devastated. There was a meeting of left-wing members of parliament in Ramallah just a few days ago with Abbas, and they left encouraged, thinking that there would be the continuation of peace talks. And meanwhile, he sent people to make a deal with murderers instead, to make a deal with Hamas, to make a deal with people that want to blow up men, women, and children here in Israel. And so the left is really, really devastated. The Israeli right, however, they feel vindicated. They feel that what they've been saying all along about how Abbas couldn't be trusted has been proven correct. And they're saying, I told you so, to the Israeli left. But Netanyahu and the ministers, they want there to be a peace process, and they're deliberating right now on what to do. They've had a security cabinet meeting go on now for more than 6 hours because they don't want to see the peace process end.
Well, PJ Crowley, let's just come to you. The deal has not been viewed with any great favor by the Obama administration either.
Well, I think from a U.S. standpoint, while we understand that the Palestinians have gone now 8 years without a formal election, and I've been in a room with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Abu Mazen where he's talked about the challenge of legitimacy from a PLA standpoint. So understanding that, what is concerning to the United States is one of timing. Obviously, you're at a crunch point where, just a few days from now, critical decision as to whether, these talks are extended, and this will be viewed as a poison pill, and an effort by one or both parties, not to make the concessions to lead the process forward, but trying to jockey to avoid blame. This is an election year in the United States, and for Congress, which actually holds the purse strings, if this government comes to pass, and that's a big if. Obviously, we know that these announcements have been made before and fallen through before. But I would be relatively confident that if the unity government is formed, the United States Congress in an election year is going to suspend aid to the Palestinian Authority.
Well, Hanan Oshrawi, you have been rather patient there to respond to Gil Hoffman's comments about the nature of the Palestinian government should Hamas take part within it. What is your immediate response to that?
Well, I have several responses. First of all, Israeli response is very disingenuous, actually, because Israel can negotiate and has negotiated with Hamas repeatedly on prisoner release, prisoner exchange, multiple ceasefires, whether directly or indirectly, only when it suits its purposes. And of course, it has the convenient label of a post-it that all Hamas people or all people of Gaza are terrorists and so on, and it's very convenient for this type of spin and propaganda. But let me say that when we set up a government in Palestine, the government is not the political address. It is not the political decision maker. We are not talking about a government of national unity. We are talking about a government of national accord. In other words, it is a government of professional, independent technocrats, so to speak, to deliver services, to build institutions. The political decision-making and the negotiations are all within the realm or the confines, the mandate of the PLO. The PLO is the political address, and it is the party that takes decisions and that negotiates. So nobody's asking them to negotiate with anybody they don't want to negotiate with. And this government has not been negotiating with our government. It's been negotiating with the PLO. The same with the American administration. They've been talking to the PLO and the head of the PLO, not with individual factions or individual parties as a whole. But at the same time, I think the issue of legitimacy, the issue of revitalizing the democracy in Palestine, at reunification, this is a source of empowerment that is badly needed in order to move ahead. And it is something that should be looked at positively, not used to punish the Palestinians. And as we said, the counterpart is the PLO. Negotiations have been going on. And of course, when anybody joins the PLO, it will join in accordance with the PLO commitments and agreements, and therefore will be part of the PLO agenda.
Well, let's go to Gil Hoffman, if I may, at this particular point. Gil Hoffman, is there perhaps opportunity here? You and other Israelis are seeing only threat in this merger, but is there not opportunity too? Are those who want peace not encouraged by negotiating with parties that are stronger by their unity than weaker in their division?
When you see Abbas make a deal with people who praised bin Laden, I don't see how you can find any opportunity in that. And I find that the fact that Hanan Ashrawi is defending Hamas, trying to make them not sound like terrorists, it's not just Israel who calls them terrorists, it's the United States, it's the European Union, Japan, all over the world.
If I may, apologies for interrupting, Gil, but Hanan Ashrawi was making the point that it is the PLO that Israel is negotiating with, and the PLO's agreements with Israel remain in place despite this merger. This is a critical point of information, is it not?
And the PLO has now, instead of making peace with Israel, decided to make peace with Hamas. They violated the trust of Israel, of the United States, of the entire international community. Now how can Netanyahu justify to his people negotiating with them again? It'll be very hard to convince the people of Israel.
Well, let's just step away from this domestic almost argument, and let's go to PJ Crowley, because it is crucially important too about how the US deals with it. There are those in Congress who will be pressing to cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority. There are those within the Obama administration who will be very skeptical that a negotiation process can continue given what we've just heard in these past few minutes. What does the Obama administration do? Is the negotiation process now in tatters?
Well, in a word, probably. I wouldn't say tatters, but certainly this is going to retard the effort. Probably the talks will perhaps continue at a low level, but for all intents and purposes, the process this current round of negotiations will likely stall over this gesture. I mean, Hanan gave a very reasonable legal analysis about the relationship between the PLO and the PA, but the practical matter is, we understand where this process has to go from a substantive aspect. This is a political challenge, and we've seen over the past several years. The fact is that neither side has been willing to, create, conditions in public, political conditions, to enable the other to make difficult decisions, whether it's settlements on the Israeli side or whether in this particular case it's a unity government on the Palestinian side. So I think from the United States standpoint, we'll just have to see, first of all, does the unity government come into place? Secondly, is there an actual election process? Thirdly, does that election process, create a mandate to go into final status negotiations? If, for example, you have a unity government, is that unity government now responsible for what happens in Gaza? Clearly, from an Israeli standpoint, if you have daily attacks from the Gaza side, missiles that cross over into Israeli territory, that does not create political conditions for a negotiation to go forward. So, a big if there's an election, if there's unity, if Hamas were to accept the clear conditions that accepts Israel's right to exist honors previous obligations, and joins the process as a constructive partner, big if, then yes, there could be the possibility here, but experience would say that's not likely to happen.
Well, while we ponder these ifs, let's just take a look at the deal itself. Despite widespread skepticism over the new deal, some things are different this time around. Hamas has lost an important ally in the downfall of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. The conflict there has seen the organization branded a terrorist group. Its longtime backer, Syria, has problems of its own, and financial support from Iran has diminished as that country makes moves towards the West. All of this adds to a dire economic situation in Hamas-run Gaza, which has piled pressure on the group, perhaps, to compromise. And Fatah looks politically weaker too in the face of faltering peace negotiations with Israel. This group has faced a public backlash now that months of US brokered talks seem to be effectively at a dead end. Hanan Ashrawi, both sides weakened at the moment, both Fatah and Hamas. Is this deal emerging out of weakness, out of the knowledge that there is something lacking in both parties? They've run out of time.
Yeah, in some ways it is, particularly the conditions that Hamas is undergoing. But Hamas has certainly committed itself to a ceasefire with Israel and has kept it to the point of even attacking those who were using violence against Israel. So I would say, yes, Hamas wants legitimacy and recognition, and the only way to do that is to be within the political fold, so to speak, to be part of a pluralistic, inclusive political system, not outside it and not an alternative to it, but to abide by Palestinian law, by rule of law, and to abide by good governance, things that we have been asking for. So in a sense, this is a corrective move. And I think, the double standards are amazing. If I may comment on what has been said, here is Israel deliberately provoking the Palestinians, deliberately expanding settlement activities, stealing more land, stealing more resources, escalating its violence, evicting Palestinians out of their homes, increasing home demolitions, expelling them from Jerusalem, doing everything possible, including almost daily raids on Gaza, killing people daily, which of course the press doesn't cover. That is okay, that's all right. That's not violating trust or international law or the most common norms of human decency. They can do it. But when the Palestinians want to repair their system within democratic principles on the basis of the common good, and bringing Hamas into the fold is good for everybody, because it means that people will be bound by common agreements. And the fact that the PLO has signed since 1988 the recognition of Israel, the acceptance of the two-state solution, this means that anybody within the PLO is bound by its commitments. This is a development because Hamas openly said that it will abide by the two-state solution.
Well, Gil
so
Hoffman,
instead of
your view on
looking
that,
at the positive,
once
everybody's bashing the Palestinians, whether it's the Americans who let the Israelis literally get away with murder, or whether it's the Israelis who are clutching at straws, because they negotiate with Hamas when they need to, and they're very happy to have ceasefires with Hamas.
Well, let's just go to Gil Hoffman for a response on that. I mean, particularly that issue about an implicit recognition of the two-state solution. Is Hamas signaling by its inclusion within the PLO, under the umbrella, so to speak, of the PLO. Does this not move things forward?
I'd like to see Khalid Mashal and the Hamas leadership embrace the two-state solution, say they don't want to wipe Israel off the map anymore. If there would have been such an announcement yesterday, while they were announcing that they were making a deal with Fatah, America wouldn't be condemning the Palestinians and threatening to cut off their funding. America would be praising them and saying that now the ball is in Israel's court instead of saying the ball is in the court of the Palestinians.
Congress gets its cue from
so
Israel.
Now there's an election coming up. Finally, I didn't interrupt you, Hanan. There's an election coming up among the Palestinians. They haven't had an election for president since January 2005, for parliament since January 2006. Abbas is celebrating the 10th year of a 4-year term. That's not a democracy. The Palestinian people deserve better, but the Palestinian people are being challenged by the world to say, okay, you have the right to vote. Choose people who want to make peace with Israel. Abbas is almost 80 years old. Abbas has missed many, many opportunities to make peace with Israel, and he's dropped the ball.
Well,
now
PJ
there's going to be
Crowley,
another
if I may
opportunity
just
for the Palestinian people
go to you
to
on
maybe
that.
elect younger leaders.
Is that a fair comment, what you just heard from Gil Hoffman there, that the ball's been dropped, that the Palestinian leadership has not necessarily been pushing for peace?
I think he's
Well, I think it's fair to say
reality,
that,
Gil. I think you should look at facts rather than at figments of your own imagination.
Well, Hanan, if we
The
could just
most
hear from PJ Crowley
accommodating
first, and then I'll come to
moderate
you.
and peaceful. What?
Let's just hear from PJ Crowley first, and then I'll come back to you.
Ahead.
PJ.
Well, I think over the past 15 or 20 years, it's fair to say that each side has made critical mistakes at various junctures. As I said, we understand, largely speaking, the substance of what it will take to get to a final status agreement and end the conflict. What we have here is a political challenge, and we have not been able to, marshal political strength on all sides all at once, to get over this threshold. And the net effect of what's happening here, and I don't think it's just about yesterday. Clearly, the current round of negotiations was stalling even before, the development yesterday. It will probably go into hibernation for a while, and from a practical standpoint, we'll probably, reconsider where we are sometime early in 2015. That's the practical net effect of where we are. It's hard to see how any kind of meaningful negotiations will continue under the current political dynamic. And the United States will be prepared to continue to be a facilitator. But ultimately, what you see right now from a U.S. standpoint is both parties are seeking preconditions, and both parties are making sure that those preconditions for an actual negotiation do not happen at the present time.
Well, Hanan Ashrawi, is the deal part of the frustration, the Palestinian frustration, with a negotiation process that was stumbling along?
Well, the deal is not a result of frustration. It's a result of a commitment to the national well-being of the political system and a response to a popular demand, yes. But it's not a done deal, as we said, because there are all sorts of steps of implementation. Now, all this bad-mouthing Hamas, of course, there are parties within the Israeli coalition that are even much worse than Hamas in denying our right to exist, in denying the two-state solution, in spouting, racist arguments all the way. We don't stop and tell the Israeli government we won't talk to you unless you cleanse yourself of the party of Naftali Bennett or of Lieberman or whatever. This is the choice of the Israeli public. We don't like it, we don't respect it, but it's your choice. We negotiate with your government. We have the PLO, we are committed to negotiations, you should respect that. And you should respect the positions that we have undertaken in accordance with international law. And PJ, we did not violate international law. We did not attack Israel, we did not build settlements, we did not place it under siege, we did not steal their land or resources. It's Israel that's doing these things. And when they expand settlement activities and they expand the violence, and they put Gaza under a strangulating siege, and they fragment the West Bank with checkpoints, and they make life a living hell for Palestinians. Isn't this a violation of international law? Isn't this a violation of the most basic requirements of peace? I think there has to be some sort of even-handedness and objective assessment of reality by the Americans. You should tell the Israelis to stop their settlement activities. They're illegal. They destroy the chances of peace.
Well, let's just go to Gil Hoffman very briefly. Gil Hoffman, particularly a response to Hanan's comments about there are negotiations that Israel does not want to negotiate with elements of Hamas. However, within the Israeli government or within the Israeli political system, there are elements that to have nothing to do with Palestinians. Is Hanan's point fair that there are people you don't want to negotiate with on either side?
There are right-wing people and left-wing people in the government of Israel, and it's the left-wing people who won out and ensured that there would be negotiations going on over the last 9 months, that were making progress and would have continued to make progress. And even the most right-wingers this past week were already conceding and saying, okay, we will allow the talks to continue under certain conditions. And I really thought they were going to be continuing until the Fatah made a deal with Hamas. And in the Knesset, in our parliament, there's a majority for a Palestinian state. And any agreement that the Americans would have brought, would have passed in the Knesset, would have come to a referendum among the people people of Israel, they would have voted in favor of it. The Palestinian people, the last time they had an election for parliament, elected a majority for Hamas. The polls among the Palestinians show that the majority of them don't want a two-state solution. And that's what's sad right now. That's what has to change for there to be peace in the Middle East.
Well, at that particular point, always not enough time to end these discussions. My thanks to our guests, P.J. Crowley, Hanan Ashrawi, and Gil Hoffman. And do please add your voice to this discussion at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or get us on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.